Rain tapped against the cobblestone street, each droplet echoing in the night like a ticking clock. Outside the grand doors of La Belle Maison, an upscale restaurant reserved for the city's elite, cars lined up with their engines humming, headlights cutting through the misty air. Inside, however, the world felt different. Warm light from crystal chandeliers poured over velvet chairs and polished floors. The sound of glasses clinking in toasts blended with hushed laughter, a symphony of wealth and privilege. It was a sanctuary for those who had everything, and a battlefield for those who had nothing. Among the glitter and chatter moved Emily. Her uniform, though pressed, carried faint stains that no amount of scrubbing could erase. Her shoes, worn thin, squeaked softly with every hurried step across the polished tiles. She balanced trays stacked with silverware and steaming plates, her fragile smile fixed in place, masking exhaustion she could no longer hide. Her eyes, tired, sunken yet resilient, betrayed the battles she fought long before stepping into this restaurant. At home, her mother lay in a dimly lit bedroom, struggling to breathe without the expensive medication the doctor insisted upon. Bills had piled on the kitchen counter like a wall she could not climb. And her own dreams, the art school she once longed to attend, the canvases gathering dust, remained buried beneath the weight of survival. But none of that mattered here. To the wealthy diners, Emily was invisible, a shadow flitting between tables, a servant whose worth was measured only by the speed of her service and the steadiness of her hands. And yet tonight something was different. Tonight cruelty would not pass unseen. The heavy wooden doors swung open, breaking the rhythm of the evening. A group of men and women swept inside, their laughter carrying across the dining hall like a trumpet fanfare. They were dressed in designer suits and shimmering gowns, the air thick with expensive perfume. Their confidence bordered on arrogance, as though the room itself bent around them. They claimed their table in the center of the restaurant, the kind of table chosen not for comfort but for visibility. Every glance, every whisper seemed to orbit their presence. Emily approached, tray in hand, her smile trembling under the weight of their eyes. She recited the specials, her voice soft, measured, but before she could finish, one of the men interrupted with a chuckle. "Don't strain yourself, sweetheart. Just bring us the most expensive thing you've got. I'm sure you can handle that much." The table erupted in laughter, each sound sharp as broken glass. Emily lowered her gaze, forcing herself to nod. But their comments did not end there. They noticed her shoes, worn to the threads, and one woman sneered, "How quaint. She's serving caviar in shoes that belong in a thrift shop." Another chimed in, "Careful with those hands, darling. Wouldn't want your nervous shaking to ruin my silk dress." Every insult hit harder than the last. Emily's hands trembled as she poured their wine, the red liquid swirling dangerously close to the rim of the glass. When a single drop spilled onto the white tablecloth, one man gasped in exaggerated horror. "Oh, she did mess it up. Didn't I tell you?" Their laughter echoed, cruel and unrelenting, while other diners turned their heads, some amused, some uncomfortable, but none daring to interfere. Inside, Emily's heart pounded. The walls seemed to close in, the chandelier's golden glow mocking the storm rising within her chest. She wanted to disappear, to run into the rain outside and never look back. But she couldn't. She had a mother waiting at home, a life tethered to every tip she earned, no matter how small. And so she swallowed her pride, hiding the burn of tears behind a mask of obedience. But something inside her shifted. Something fragile cracked under the weight of their cruelty. With each insult, a silent resolve grew stronger. She realized she had one final chance, not to fight back with anger, but to leave them with something they would never forget. The meal dragged on, each course accompanied by more laughter at her expense. By the time the dessert plates were cleared, Emily's hands were numb from carrying trays, her throat raw from forced politeness. She returned to the counter, picked up the leather folder, and carefully slipped the bill inside. But before closing it, she paused. Her pen hovered over the paper, her pulse racing. Then, with steady determination, she wrote something, words not born of spite but of truth. Words that carried the weight of her story, her pain, and her dignity. She returned to the table, her steps slow, deliberate. Setting the bill down, her hand trembled ever so slightly. Though her face remained unreadable, one of the men smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Make sure you don't mess this up too, sweetheart," he sneered, the words laced with venom. Emily said nothing. She bowed her head slightly and walked away, her heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. Behind her, the group opened the bill, their laughter still ringing across the restaurant until silence fell. Because what Emily had written on that slip of paper was something none of them expected, and within moments the entire restaurant would fall silent. The bill sat untouched for a moment, its leather edges gleaming faintly beneath the chandelier's golden light. The group of wealthy customers, still basking in their cruel amusement, barely noticed it at first. Their laughter rolled on, echoing across the polished floors until one of them, impatient, restless, snatched the folder and flipped it open. What happened next would silence not just their table but the entire restaurant. The laughter stuttered, then died. The man's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing as he reread the words scribbled at the bottom of the bill. One by one, the others leaned closer, their expressions changing. Smug grins softened into confusion, then disbelief, and finally, something none of them were prepared for: shame. Emily's note wasn't an outburst of anger or insult. It was something far more disarming. Written in neat, careful strokes, it told a story they had never bothered to see. She explained how every coin she earned went toward her mother's medicine, how nights blurred into mornings as she juggled double shifts, and how even when she was mocked, humiliated, or treated like she didn't belong, she whispered silent prayers for the very people who crushed her spirit. "I pray," she had written, "that kindness finds you, even if it never finds me." The table froze. The air between them grew heavy, the perfume and wine suddenly too sharp, too suffocating. One woman shifted in her seat, her perfectly manicured hands trembling as she reached for her glass of water, unable to meet the eyes of her companions. Another man, the loudest of the group, swallowed hard, his polished confidence crumbling. And then, something unexpected happened. The quietest man among them, who had laughed the least, pushed back his chair. He stood slowly, his eyes locked on the words before him, as if he had glimpsed a reflection of his own failures in the ink. With deliberate steps, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his wallet, and placed a thick stack of bills onto the table. No words, no theatrics, just a gesture so striking it made the others stare in stunned silence. Emily, watching from across the room, froze, her breath catching in her throat. But what happened next would shock everyone watching. Other diners, who had overheard the cruel laughter earlier, began to notice the sudden change in atmosphere. Curiosity rippled through the restaurant. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. A sense of tension, of something extraordinary about to unfold, swept through the golden-lit hall. One couple from a nearby table leaned in, whispering. Then the husband stood, walked quietly toward Emily, and slipped a folded note into her hand. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. Inside was a tip so generous it blurred her vision with tears. "For your mother," the man said softly before returning to his seat. The chain reaction had begun. More guests followed, some leaving envelopes, others pressing folded bills into Emily's hand, their eyes filled with empathy. Even the staff, who had long witnessed the humiliation she endured, stood a little taller, pride swelling in their chests as they watched kindness ripple across the room like a rising tide. At the once arrogant table, silence reigned. The men and women who had mocked her shoes, her trembling hands, her existence now sat exposed. Their cruelty had been answered not with rage but with humility, and it had left them defenseless. One of the women wiped at her eyes, mascara smudging under her trembling fingers. Another man stared at the floor, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. Emily approached cautiously, her hands shaking not from fear this time, but from the weight of disbelief. She whispered a thank you, her voice cracking, her eyes glistening with tears. For the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like just another shadow slipping through the golden light of the restaurant. She felt seen, she felt human. And yet, as powerful as the moment was, one thought pierced through the awe. What would these people do when they left? Would they carry this lesson beyond the safety of chandeliers and velvet curtains? Or would they return to their old ways once the guilt faded? But that answer would come later. For now, Emily stood in the center of a room that had once drowned her spirit, and she realized something profound. Dignity cannot be stolen. It can only be surrendered. And tonight she refused to surrender it. The cruel table remained speechless, their eyes fixed on the bill as though the ink itself were carved into their souls. They had been silenced not by anger but by truth, and the truth was undeniable. Kindness had the power to disarm even the sharpest cruelty. Emily finished her shift that night carrying not just tips, but something far more valuable: respect, hope. A reminder that even in the darkest corners, light can break through in the most unexpected ways. But little did she know, this single night and the words she dared to write would echo far beyond the walls of the restaurant, changing lives in ways she could never have imagined. Please like and subscribe my YouTube channel for more such videos.